Welcome to Untold Black Legend Paris 13 and 14. A 70-year-old man stands chained to a stake. His body is shattered after 7 years of relentless torture, but his eyes still blaze with defiance. Jacques de Molay, Grand Master of the Knights Templar. A massive crowd is gathered, expecting to see a broken man plead for forgiveness. Instead, they witness something no one anticipates. De Molay withdraws every forced confession. He declares the Templars innocent. And then, with his final breath of freedom, he calls down God's judgment on King Philip IV and Pope Clement V, summoning them to answer before heaven within a year. Under medieval law, a heretic who recants cannot be spared. The sentence is fire. The torches are lit. The flames rise slowly, deliberately, wrapping around his body inch by inch. Witnesses later swear that Jacques de Molay never screamed. As the smoke filled his lungs, he continued to repeat his curse again and again, until his voice was finally silenced. 33 days later, the Pope was dead. 8 months after that, the king followed. Coincidence? For more than 7 centuries, people have whispered about what became known as the Templar curse. What you're about to hear are the 10 most horrifying execution methods ever devised by medieval executioners. Punishments engineered not to kill quickly, but to stretch death across hours, sometimes days. This is Untold Black Legend, and this is what really happened. Every week, we uncover the stories history tried to erase, the executions your teachers never talked about, the punishments too brutal for textbooks. If you believe the truth of history should be told without censorship, hit subscribe, because what comes next is far worse than anything you've heard so far. We begin with fire. Execution by burning at the stake wasn't just a method of killing, it was theater. A religious spectacle designed to prove the church's absolute authority over the body, the soul, and death itself. Fire was believed to purify, that was the doctrine. Flames destroyed the sinful flesh while cleansing the corrupted soul, offering the condemned one final chance at salvation through suffering. But here's what history class usually leaves out. The Catholic Church officially forbade its clergy from shedding blood. Canon law was clear on that point, so burning became the perfect solution. No sword, no blade, no spilled blood. Just sacred fire, doing God's work. The condemned was marched through the streets wearing a yellow garment painted with flames and devils. Crowds threw garbage, rotten vegetables, stones. By the time they reached the public square, the victim was already bruised and bleeding. They were chained to a vertical wooden post. Music chains, not ropes. Ropes burned through too quickly, wood and straw stacked around them to chest height. Then the executioner lit the fire. Here's where it gets truly disturbing. Professional executioners were skilled craftsmen. They belonged to guilds. They trained for years. They knew exactly how to build a fire. A fast, hot fire killed relatively quickly. Dense, dry wood, good ventilation. The victim inhaled superheated music air. Lungs seared, airways closed, death by asphyxiation in 10 to 15 minutes. But a slow fire, a deliberately constructed slow fire. Green wood that smolders, music, wet straw that creates smoke but little heat. Poor ventilation. The victim burned progressively. Feet first, skin blistering, then splitting, then charring, fat rendering beneath the flesh like candle wax, then legs, then thighs. The smell was reportedly unbearable. Witnesses described it as roasting meat mixed with something acrid, chemical. Strong men vomited. The victim would scream, beg, plead for water, music, call out to God. Some went mad from pain before death finally came. A slow fire could take 3 to 4 hours to kill. Joan of Arc, the Maid of Orleans, burned at Rouen on May 30th, 1431. She was 19 years old, a peasant girl who claimed God spoke to her. Music who led armies, who terrified English commanders. Her fire was built to last. Witnesses reported she called out to Jesus 6 times before the smoke finally silenced her. 6 separate cries, meaning she was conscious, burning for an extended period. Her executioner was so disturbed he sought out a priest that night. He said he was terrified that he had burned a saint. 25 years later, Joan was declared innocent. 500 years later, she was canonized. But that May morning in 1431, she burned while an English crowd cheered. Giordano Bruno, philosopher, mathematician, burned in Rome on February 17, 1600. His crime suggesting the universe was infinite, that stars were distant suns. Before they lit the fire, his tongue was nailed to his jaw, a metal spike through muscle and flesh, so he couldn't speak heresies as he died. He burned in enforced silence. But his ideas survived. Over 50,000 accused witches died music this way across 5 centuries. But wait, it gets worse. For high treason in England, death wasn't enough. The punishment had to match the enormity of the crime: hanged, drawn, and quartered. The full sentence described each stage in clinical detail. The condemned was forced to stand music and listen to exactly how they would die. First, the traitor was stripped and tied to a wooden frame called a hurdle. Horses dragged it through the streets. Cobblestones tore at exposed flesh. Crowds threw garbage, animal waste, stones. By the time they reached the execution site, the victim was already bleeding from dozens of wounds. Bones sometimes broken, skin shredded. Then came hanging, but not to death, just until nearly dead. The executioner calculated carefully enough to choke to bring them to the edge of death, but not enough to actually kill. Still conscious, still breathing. The condemned was cut down. Then came mutilation. Castration, first genitals severed and burned before the victim's eyes. The screaming proved they were still conscious. Then the drawing. The executioner cut open the abdomen, reached inside, pulled out intestines, music, slowly, carefully, while the victim watched his own organs removed from his body. The intestines were burned immediately. The stomach followed. Other organs extracted while keeping the victim alive. The heart was removed last. Finally, decapitation and quartering. The body cut into 4 pieces, boiled in salt to preserve them, displayed on spikes across the kingdom. William Wallace, the Scottish rebel, executed in London in 1305. Accord. Ing to records, Wallace remained conscious until his intestines were being burned. Witnesses said he was still moving his lips. Some believed in prayer when the executioner finally reached for his heart. His head was placed on a spike on London Bridge. Music, his quarters sent to Newcastle, Berwick, Stirling, and Perth. His crime, fighting for Scottish independence. Guy Fawkes faced this sentence in 6006. Weakened by torture, he managed to jump from the scaffold and break his own neck before the worst began, a small mercy he gave himself. This punishment remained legal in England until 1870, the 19th century, when trains already crossed the countryside, but at least hanging, drawing, and quartering music ended in death eventually. The next method was designed to keep you alive for days. Now, I have to ask you something. Of everything you've heard so far, the flames that cooked Joan of Arc alive, the public gutting of William Wallace, which disturbs you most? Drop a comment below. Tell me which method keeps you up at night, because we're not even halfway through. And the next execution method involves animals. The Holy Roman Empire and France perfected an execution designed for maximum suffering with maximum visibility. The breaking wheel. The condemned was stripped naked and tied spread eagle to a large cartwheel, the kind used for heavy farm wagons, placed horizontally on a wooden scaffold raised above the crowd. Everyone had to see. That was the entire point. The executioner approached carrying a heavy iron bar, sometimes called a breaking bar, sometimes simply called music the iron, a tool designed for one purpose. What followed was the systematic destruction of the hum and body. Ankles first. The executioner positioned the bar carefully, raised it, brought it down with precise, calculated force. The small bones of the ankle shattered with a crack that witnesses said echoed across the entire square. The foot flopped loosely, connected only by skin and tendon. Then the wrists, same precision, same sickening crack. Then the lower legs, the tibia and fibula. Multiple blows needed here. The bones splintered into fragments beneath the skin. Then the forearms, then the thighs, the fear, the strongest music bone in the human body. This required the heaviest blows, sometimes multiple executioners working in rotation, then the upper arms. Finally the rib cage. Each rib broken individually, methodically, one after another. The executioner took breaks between sections. Let the victim scream. Let the crowd absorb what they were witnessing. Let the lesson sink in. Some executioners would drink water, wipe their brows, chat with officials, treating it as routine work. Each blow was calculated for maximum pain and minimum chance of immediate death. The executioner deliberately avoided hitting major arteries, avoided the skull and spine. The goal was a body that was utterly completely destroyed. Every major bone shattered into fragments, but still alive, still breathing, still conscious and aware of everything happening. Once the breaking was complete, a process that could take over an hour, the condemned shattered limbs were woven through the spokes of the wheel, threading broken arms and legs between wooden spokes like some grotesque piece of living art. The wheel was then raised vertically on a tall pole, displaying the broken body high above the high enough that everyone in the square could see clearly. And there, the victim was left to die from exposure, from dehydration, from shock, from organ failure, from birds that would land music and begin eating their flesh while they still breathed and watched. This process could take days. 2 days was common. 3 days was documented. Some victims reportedly survived for over a week on the wheel, unable to move a single muscle, unable to die, unable to do anything but suffer under the burning sun or freezing rain. Jean Calas, a Protestant merchant in Catholic France, 64 years old, executed in 1762. He was completely innocent. His son had committed suicide. The authorities accused John of murder. The trial was a farce. He maintained his innocence throughout, even as each bone shattered. It took him over 2 hours to die. Voltators spent years investigating. 3 years later, Jean Calas was officially exonerated. But he had still died screaming on the wheel. Sometimes justice arrives too late, and sometimes it never arrives at all. The ancient Romans invented a punishment so psychologically terrifying that medieval Europe revived it. The peña, the penalty of the sack, reserved for parasites, those who killed their own parents. The condemned was beaten, head covered with a wolfkin bag music and placed inside a sealed leather sack or barrel. But not alone. 4 animals joined them, a dog symbolizing faithlessness, a rooster symbolizing unnatural behavior, a viper symbolizing cold-blooded treachery, a monkey symbolizing mockery of humanity. The barrel was sealed and thrown into a river. Death came by drowning eventually. But first came something worse. Total darkness. Absolute music blackness. A space so confined you couldn't move your arms. And 4 panicked, terrified animals, also trapped, also dying, clawing, biting, scratching in desperation. The viper striking repeatedly, the dog biting whatever it could reach, the roer's talons tearing flesh, the monkey clawing and screaming, all while water seeped in, while air ran out, while the barrel tumbled in the current. Witnesses reported screams could be heard even through the sealed barrel, until suddenly they stopped. But drowning, at least, was relatively quick. Minutes of terror. What comes next could last for days, and the man who perfected it earned a name that still terrifies people 500 years later. Vlad III of Wallachia didn't invent impalement, but he perfected it, elevated it to an art form of terror. History remembers him as Vlad, Music the Impaler. A wooden stake was carefully selected, sharpened music, but not too sharp. You wanted it to push organs aside, not sever them. Oiled for smooth passage. The victim was laid face down. The stake was inserted and pushed slowly music through internal organs until it emerged from the shoulder. The stake was planted vertically. The victim raised, impaled, displayed. Gravity did the rest. The body's weight pushed it slowly down the stake inch by inch, hour by hour. Victims remained conscious for extended periods. Some could speak, some begged for death, some prayed, some went mad. Death came eventually from blood loss, organ failure, shock, but never quick. Vlad impaled over 20,000 Ottoman prisoners in a single campaign, arranged in concentric circles around his capital. A forest of the dying stretching for miles. When Sultan Mehmed II, Conqueror of Constantinople, arrived with his army, he saw that forest. He turned around and went home. Even the conqueror of empires couldn't stomach the sight. The smell alone made soldiers vomit. Vlad didn't reserve impalement for enemies, thieves, adulterers, political rivals, anyone who displeased him. He would dine among the impaled bodies, watch them die while he ate. When one nobleman complained about the smell, Vlad had him impaled on an extra tall stake so he could be above the stench. The goal wasn't just execution, it was terror. And for decades, it worked. Crime dropped to almost nothing. Merchants could leave gold in the waste street. Everyone knew the punishment, but even Vlad had limits. There was one method so extreme that historians debate whether anyone actually used it. The answer is more disturbing than you think. Some methods were so horrific historians can't agree whether they were real or merely threatened. Sawing in half exists in both categories. The victim was suspended upside down, legs spread. The inverted position kept blood flowing to the brain, preserving consciousness far longer than normal. A two-man timber saw was placed at the groin and drawn downward through the body. The victim could see everything, feel teeth biting into flesh, watch blood music pooling below their inverted head. Because of the position, victims reportedly remained conscious until the saw reached the navel, sometimes further. Death came only when the saw bisected the chest cavity. Reserved for crimes considered especially heinous, extreme blasphemy, treason. Historical illustrations confirm its existence. Legal texts reference it. Whether common or rare, We may never know or certain, but the next method was officially sanctioned. Parliament itself authorized it. England reserved a special punishment for poisoners. You killed through cooking, you'll die through cooking. In 1531, Parliament passed an act authorizing death by boiling, a large cauldron filled with water or oil heated to boiling. The condemned was lowered in gradually. Feet first, the flesh cooking instantly, then legs, then deeper. Third-degree burns spreading upward, the victim screaming, begging. Only when chest deep would the executioner let go, complete submersion, death within minutes after that. But those minutes of gradual lowering, Richard Roos, a cook accused of poisoning a bishop's household, boiled alive at Smithfield in 1531. Music, the method was abolished in 1547. Even by 16th century standards, excessively music cruel. But we're not done. 3 methods remain. Each found a way to make death even more personal. 3 more methods deserve music, detailed mention. Each reveals something different about medieval cruelty and human capacity, music, for inflicting suffering. Fleeing, the systematic removal of skin from a living person. The victim was completely restrained, unable to move even an inch. The executioner used a thin razor-sharp blade, beginning at the extremities, fingers first, then hands, then forearms, working slowly, methodically inward. The skin was peeled away in careful sections, slowly, deliberately. A skilled practitioner could remove large pieces completely intact, like removing a glove. The process continued inward, arms, legs, eventually reaching the torso, the chest, the back. Death came eventually from shock, from blood loss, from the inevitable infection that followed. But victims could remain conscious, fully aware, feeling everything for hours. Some accounts claim even longer. Marco Antonio Bragarden, commander of the Venetian garrison at Famagusta, Cyprus. After an 11-month siege, he surrendered to Ottoman forces in 1571, under negotiated terms, guaranteeing safe passage for his men. The Ottomans broke the agreement. Music Bragarden was tortured for days. His ears and nose were cut off. He was forced to carry heavy sacks of earth while being beaten by soldiers. Then, on August 17, 1571, he was flayed alive in the public square. The process took hours. He reportedly remained conscious and praying until the executioner reached his waist. His skin was stuffed with straw, dressed in his military uniform, and paraded through the streets on the back of a cow. Eventually, it was sent to Constantinople as a trophy and displayed in the arsenal. Venetian agents finally recovered the skin in 1580, nearly a decade later. It now rests in a shrine in the Church of Santi Giovanni a Paolo in Venice. Precipitation, a simpler music method being thrown from heights, castle towers, city walls, cliff edges, sometimes onto rocks below, sometimes onto music-sharpened stakes, sometimes the fall killed instantly. Impact with the ground ending everything in a fraction of a second. Sometimes it didn't. Victims would survive the initial fall, legs shattered, spine broken, skull cracked, and lie dying slowly for hours while crowds watched from above, unable to move, unable to die quickly, just waiting. The defenestration of Prague on May 23, 1618, when Protestant Bohemian nobles threw 2 Catholic imperial governors and their secretary from the windows of Prague Castle a drop of over 70 feet helped music spark the 30 Years' War. The Catholics survived, landing in a pile of manure. They claimed angels had saved them. Not everyone who fell from heights was so fortunate. And finally, the cage known as gibbeting in England. Iron cages shaped roughly to human bodies were suspended from city walls, church music towers, castle gates, bridges. The condemned was sealed inside the cage. Sometimes there was just enough space to sit. Sometimes they were forced to stand. Sometimes there was no room to move at all. And then they were simply abandoned. No executioner returned. No mercy followed. Death came slowly, from thirst as days passed without water, from exposure to sun and rain, from blistering heat in summer, from freezing winds in winter. Birds would land on the bars, then on the body itself, pecking at exposed skin while the victim was still alive, still conscious enough to feel it, to watch it happen. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. When death finally came, the body was not removed. It remained there, suspended above the ground, rotting in public view. Flesh decayed, organs fell away. Eventually, only bones were left, bleached by the sun, clattering in the wind. A permanent warning. These cages weren't hidden. They were placed where everyone could see them. City gates, crossroads, market squares. Every passerby was meant to look up and understand the message. This is what happens to those who defy authority. And this method was not unique. All medieval execution techniques shared the same core purpose. They were public, they were prolonged, and they were designed to terrorize me. Medieval society didn't view execution as revenge. It was seen as cosmic correction. Crime disrupted the divine order, and suffering was the price required to restore balance. The agony of the criminal was believed to erase the sin itself. That belief exposes something deeply uncomfortable. These were Christian societies built on teachings of mercy, forgiveness, and compassion. Yet they perfected cruelty on an industrial scale. The contradiction wasn't denied, it was formalized, written into law, endorsed by religious authorities. The movement to abolish cruel punishment didn't truly begin until the Enlightenment, when philosophers began asking dangerous questions. Should the state have the right to torture its citizens to death? Does suffering make society moral, or merely obedient? Today these methods horrify us, and they should, but they also serve as a warning. Moral progress is not guaranteed, it is not permanent. Any society can justify extreme cruelty when violence is legalized, ritualized, and wrapped in ideology. The executioners themselves didn't believe they were monsters. They believed they were professionals. They followed orders. They carried out sentences. Then they went home, to dinner, to their children, to ordinary lives. And that may be the most disturbing truth of all. If you believe historical truth should be told without censorship, subscribe to Untold Black Legend. I'm Untold Black Legend, and this is what really happened. But medieval executioners were not the only ones to master prolonged death. There was an empire that made these punishments look merciful. The Assyrians. What they did to their enemies makes impalement seem humane. Want M.E. to tell that story? Let me know in the comments. And if you made it this far, drop a like. So I know these stories matter. I'll see you in the next historical nightmare.